Jill?
I saw her some time ago. She headed that way the last time I saw her, but that doesn't mean a
If
thing.
you see, tackle her.
I will. All right.
You have permission.
I'll head her back to the podium.
Man, that was good. I thought that was Mission Impossible, but accomplished. Good evening. I'm Jim Hodge, and as my wife Sally reminds me, we spent 29 winters in Rochester, Minnesota. Welcome to this remembrance of Franklyn G. Prendergast, scientist, leader, raconteur, and keeper of the Queen's, no, maybe it's the King's. Does it switch back to the King's English? I don't know. The family has asked me to convey their deep appreciation for your being here, for the many expressions of sympathy and the touching tributes to Frank since his passing. Deb, Catherine, Sean, and their partners Matthew and Annie are with us, and Annie's family as well. And I hope you get a chance to say hello while we're gathered. The family is especially grateful for the support they received from Mayo CEO and President Gianrico Ferrugia, and for the departments that helped make this evening possible. A nod to Jacob. Where's Jacob? Malmwick. There he is. He was the contact with the family. They're deeply appreciative and responsible for most of tonight's arrangement. And we did some good damage together over the years. Thank you, Jacob. Chuck Potter, and I don't know if he's around, but let's just formally say thank you, Chuck, for opening Mayowood on a Monday night. It's closed on Monday. I think of Frank's countless hours that he spent here and in the foundation house, and Chuck was a good humorist for Frank and a good friend. And somewhere is the ever remarkable Jill Cappers, executive assistant, expert herder, able tracker, shepherd, and Sherpa and shaman, devoted and reliable friend, colleague for decades. Where is she? Is she around? Blessings on your head, Jill. We can't possibly imagine.
Yes, I'm blushing.
For sure. The family has asked a longtime friend, Scott Rosenau, and Jill, and asked me to make remarks today, and the family as well will make some remarks. And then the mic is open for those fearless friends that may want to share a sentiment or a special story about Frank. So I'm going to lead off. Frank. Who could ever imagine a mother's prophetic naming of a child? It was not only a name, but his entire biography written in advance of his life. He was indeed Frank in every sense of the word. And because he was Frank, people were drawn to him, and people were withdrawn from him sometimes. But so many of you here tonight felt, if you knew him a short or a long, long period of time, felt his innate sense of justice, his relentless search for truth, and what were essentially right actions in the world. He saw potential in others, and whenever possible, illuminated, lifted, cajoled, and pushed others to be the best versions of themselves. He was oft to say, potential realizable was inspiring, potential unrealized or made unrealizable was disheartening. So how many scientific careers did this man touch? And not only scientists, administrators and food service people, caregivers and custodians, students and patients. Frank saw people in a world where so many do not feel seen, a remarkable characteristic. And although he was not a practicing clinician, he would take walks with you if you had medical problems or personal problems. He was all in and always available. Frank was, to many of us here, a good and reliable friend, and that was the highest compliment he gave to his friends, a good and reliable friend. He was unafraid to issue cautionary tales to those who failed to do their homework, who were righteous and yet not right. Thank you. Sycophants beware, inauthentic ones be damned. So many people never caught on to the fact, the reality that if you asked Frank to help review a presentation, share ideas, co-create strategies, he was all in. On the other hand, if you presented the ultimate 5 strategies or possibilities, the key solutions in a self-righteous manner, Frank would quickly point out in real time solution number 6, 7, 8, a dozen. This was not appreciated by the speaker, especially at Board of Governors or Board of Trustees meetings. You know, he despised pomposity, but he practiced it himself on occasion. Usually, but not always, in measured doses for medicinal and educational purposes. Like a famous quote about one of the Mayo brothers, Frank, and I quote, "loved the truth and sought to know it. Repartee he relished. Double entendres, he was all in, would bring smiles. And we all bathed in his laughter and would strive to earn it. He even laughed in Jamaican. Do you remember that? Particularly when you caught him off guard with an expression or devilish observation. You got Frank's laugh. Many a soul were subject to his rapier-like wit, left a conversation with Frank, only later to realize they had been punctured repeatedly. Never use a broadsword when a rapier will do was both my mother's and Frank's admonition. He was a true son of Jamaica, as we all know, traversing his grade and secondary schools and lifelong friendship. And he visited those schools and assisted them whenever he could. And he never forgot those special teachers who saw his nascent potential and nurtured it. And that carried on, as you know, throughout his life. He, like all of us, was a marvelous kaleidoscopic mixture of his experiences and choices. And my, what experiences he had, and remarkable walks he took with worldwide thought leaders. He elevated every conversation he entered. I still can't recall this, but I recall that for some inexplicable reason, I mentioned reading an article on the ladders or steps that they build for migrating salmon to get around dams, and was treated to a long and detailed lecture on the unique mating habits of the king, the sockeye, and the coho. new knowledge, which I surely will never retrieve nor dispense, but that was Frank. He could go both wide and deep on any subject that interested him. And probably what I will miss most is every conversation we had in person or over the phone began the exact same way. I would say, Franklyn G. Prendergast, my baritone, I don't know if he was a baritone, but I always called him this, baritone Jamaican genius of a friend. And he in turn would reply with all the corresponding respect that I deserved, Haji baby. Everyone. My wife and I found some comfort to know he passed away in his garden, a place of passion and certainly a sanctuary for him, where the family remembers well, weeding and tilling, planting and harvesting. I leave you with a story that some of you may or may not remember or have heard, and this puts him back at Lincoln College, Oxford. Frank was drifting a little bit and didn't anchor and didn't declare a major, and so he got called in. Is it the Don calls you in? Or that has other meanings here. But the Don or tutor called him in and noted that he really had to get a focus. And so the Don gave him a topic and said, come back next Tuesday morning and give me a paper on it. Frank came back dutifully, right on time, handed the paper to the tutor, and the tutor said, is it good? And Frank prevaricated a little bit, said, well, it's pretty good, and I worked a long time on it. And the tutor took the paper and threw it in the wastebasket. Sent him out with the same assignment for next Tuesday morning. Frank came back, is it good? And Frank said, it's pretty good. I spent a lot of time. It's pretty good. Right in the wastebasket. Same assignment next Tuesday. So he comes back. Tutor said, Frank, is it good? And Frank said, it's better than good, and gave him several reasons why it was good, and the tutor threw it in the trash can, which I'm sure he'd done many times before with drifting Rhodes scholars. But Frank never forgot that lesson, never forgot the lesson. And he could be the tutor for so many of us. So now I see him back at Oxford, handing in the autobiography of his well-examined life, and hearing once again that probing question, was it good? And without hesitation, all of us in this room tonight answered, indeed it was. A marvel it was. Thank you. Sean, you're going to share something with us.
So I went into tonight thinking of how many ways I could write a million different things, and I tried coming up with things. I tried forming speeches. I tried writing it down. But the truth is, nothing really prepares you for these sort of moments in life. It comes, when you're 50, it comes when you're 27. The age really doesn't make a difference. The impact is still there. And I was asking myself multiple questions on how I even wanted to start. I mean, a speech for a man that was so great. And I think a question that has haunted me since I was a child is, what does your dad do? Talk about a loaded question. Everything. And the truth is, I decided that I would rather give you guys anecdotes of who he was outside of the business, because I feel as though it gives insight onto who he was as a parent. The first anecdote I really want to emphasize is when I was in 8th grade, we had a science fair. And, there were plenty of kids that did simple things like the volcanoes, bake soda volcanoes. my dad said, Sean, we need to do something a little bit more elaborate. We're going to test and see how much CO2 is produced from different types of vinegars with baking soda using an apparatus that I get from my lab. Here's me at 13. What? That was one of the first, real anecdotes that came to mind when it showed that my dad had cared for everything that he did. I mean, he put his all into everything, even if it was just a science fair for 8th graders. He wanted to make sure that I had the lessons and life experiences that would prepare me for the hardships of life, and I think he did a good job. I got to see who he was in the business world. I got to see who he was as a father, and it's tough. Especially living up to someone who knew Morpheus. I mean, I got to meet Lawrence Fishburne when I was 9, and I was like, all right, I mean, this is the standard that I have to try to live up to. But the truth is, I, in the end, just want to convey that we all have a finite amount of time on this earth. Life is lived forward. It's understood looking backwards. And the best we can do is just be compassionate, try to live life as best as we can, and appreciate those around us. Thank you.
I would like to say a few words. And for all of you in the room, 10 days ago, it's Dr. Catherine.
Oh man, hello everybody. Sean and I actually both started, when we were talking about how we were going to start talking to you guys tonight, we started the same way, like what do we say? How do you start? How do you talk about somebody like my dad? And so yeah, 10 days ago, I defended my dissertation, and along the way, people would ask me all the time, are you a scientist because of what your dad did? And the answer I would always give them is no. I'm a scientist despite what he did, because I didn't want to follow that act. I think any child, any generation looks back at the generation before them and they think, my parents, my grandparents have done so much for us. They've climbed this mountain, they've planted the flag, and I get to start partway up. I get to keep climbing from where they stopped. And it's really hard to start climbing from where he stopped. And especially as a child of a person of color and an immigrant, I think it's even more important, there's even more pressure. How do you live up to that? And I don't say that because I want you to pity me. I don't want you to think I think it's a burden, because it's an honor. It is an honor to carry his legacy in any way for both Sean and I. Thank you. And I think that it's a testament to that legacy. Everybody that's here listening tonight, everybody that's here physically, everybody in this room can probably think of a time when my dad did something spectacular for them. That was his spirit. An unbelievably generous spirit. He had such gifts given to him by fate, but he knew that he did, and he wanted to use that to make the world better. He wanted to get rid of as much suffering as he possibly could. And as much as he did for everybody in this room, I know that every single one of you supported him too, and he would not have been able to have the reach that he did without everybody here holding him up too. When people are as magnificent as that man was, the world conspires around them to help them have the impact that they should. And I want to thank you on his behalf, because I know he would want to thank you too. So I'm going to just keep it brief. I'm so glad you're all here. And I don't think that Sean and I want to or can carry his legacy alone, so I want to ask all of you to carry it with us. Be generous, be curious. When you see the opportunity to uplift somebody else, take it. And for a man who did not sleep, Let's give him a chance to rest.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, the family asked Jill Keppers and Scott Rosenau to speak, and then the mic is open. It's all yours. Jill,
Thank you, Haji baby.
how do you?
And Frank really did call him that. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, celebrating and honoring Frank. I'm Jill. I worked with him for 30 years. In the beginning, Frank was the scientist, then the department chair, then Frank the director for research, then Frank the director of the cancer center, and so on and da-da-da. Early one morning, 34 years, 6 months, and 12 days ago, on the 5th floor of the Guggenheim building, Frank called me back to his office. He asked me to sit in his big orange chair and peered at me over the top of his glasses, as he always did. He said, "I have a bone to pick with you." He then sat at his desk across from me. A yellow notepad, legal size of course, lay on the desktop. And with the blue, fine tip felt pen, he wrote the letters F-R-A-N-K on a piece of paper, on a piece of that yellow paper. He showed this to me and he said, "That is my name. Please don't call me Dr. Prendergast. I am Frank. I don't give an HE double toothpicks about titles. They are not who we are. We all began the same way. I am Frank." I smiled and thought, I can work with this guy. That was Frank. When Catherine first suggested I say a few words in Frank's honor, I declined, knowing in all the collective languages, not a single word exists, or phrase, for that matter, dynamic enough, superlative enough, vivacious enough, or even large enough to cover Frank. Then I joined the Thanksgiving service celebrating the life of Frank held in Jamaica. All 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 4 seconds of it, with 53 people attending virtually, and it's videotaped for all of you to watch later. But many beautiful things and heartfelt words were spoken about Frank, highlighting his academic brilliance from a young age, his athleticism and natural ability as a leader, his thirst for knowledge and the unknown, his curiosity, his drive and energy, his desire to encourage young people, especially the young people of Jamaica, to think and question, to learn and explore possibilities. Many spoke of his passion to make the world a better place, and a better place for everyone, and how tirelessly he worked at it. At the close of the service, I thought, the only way one person could do all that and be all that was to have been a great human. And that was Frank. He was a great human. That describes Frank, a great human. Frank had a genuine interest and love of people. From the custodian to the President of the United States, he wanted to know you. Your stories in life fascinated him. He carried your stories with him. He thought about them and reflected on them, all of yours. He would say, whatever you choose to do in life, be the best you can be. Be the best gardener, be the best equestrian, be the best dentist, the best musician, the best doctor, but be the best human. Frank often opened to talk with a joke or a little funny story of his own, but he always left his audience with something to think on, something to ponder, something to grow on, always wanting to leave the world a better place. Catherine and Sean, it's my great privilege to have worked closely with your dad, and my even greater privilege to have been his friend. I miss him every day. Some Frank funnies. He had words and phrases that were only Frank. If you were in a bit of trouble, you were in deep tapioca. If you didn't get out of that bit of trouble, you were in deep doo-doo. Often, I would hear on one side of the phone conversation, people would ask, "How you doing, Frank?" "Oh, I'm sitting up and taking nourishment." Marvin Kemple, I know you're here. You were the first one I ever heard earn the name Turkey Breath. That still makes me smile. Oh, who was it? That's yours? Well, Sean's older than you, or I mean, Marvin's older than you, so he got it first. Yeah, first, yeah. Your turkey breath too. It's a good phrase. Frank would say, "What's your story?" And he really wanted to know. "Walk and talk with me." We heard that a lot. "Toot the sweet." Get it going. He was a whistling wonder, and I heard somebody mention Jim, his great belly laugh. His Jamaican belly laugh. If you had the privilege of hearing that, you heard a great man laugh. Thank you again, everyone. I miss the guy.
The family asked Scott to say a few words. Scott's known the good man for decades, and Ed, his father, one of the finest clinicians imaginable, was Frank's mentor. He was a resident, and Ed was a part of his life from that moment.
Actually, I'm lucky that Frank has known 3 generations of Rose now. My kids are here too, and Frank was wonderful to my wife, my kids, all of us. My dad, he flew out when my dad was in his last days just to say goodbye. So Frank has been a wonderful, wonderful friend. And I'm going to change things. I wrote a lot. The same thing as you said. It's hard to really do it, Frank justice. I talked to him numerous times, many times a day sometimes. We all know how generous he was. We know how kind he was. We certainly know how smart he was. So I'm going to throw away some of this, and I want to address Sean and Catherine for a few things. I want to address Frank. And then as Jill started off, we have a lot of fun stories to tell about Frank, and that's what he'd like. This is a celebration of his life. He wants it to be fun, no mourning, little crying, but he wants to have fun. So as Frank, last few months, I was talking to him more and more, and you go through the introspection, the retrospection. Should I spend more time at home? Should I have, he loved it. He was studying GFP, and 2008, someone won the Nobel Prize. Frank says, "I had that stuff in my freezer. I don't know if it's still there." I should have done it. So, of course, you know, my dad at that stage, or towards the end of his, would say, no one on their deathbed says, "I wish I would have spent more time at work." Of course, my dad didn't follow that, so. And then he did say, you know, did I spend too much time? Should I have stayed in research, not administration? I said, Frank, that's crazy. You know, as we all know, Frank held various positions of leadership at Mayo, Director of Research, Cancer Center, Board of Governors, Board of Trustees. He was, I think, the longest serving one. And by helping Mayo in this institution, I told him, you help so many people. I'm biased, but this is the greatest healthcare system in the world. I said, you changed the lives. The people you hired for research go on and change the lives. The people you helped educate go on and change the lives. I said, everything you did was phenomenal. So Catherine and Sean, I know that your dad put in incredible hours in devotion to into Mayo. I was in a similar position. Didn't regret it at all. And if you haven't realized it already, the hours that your dad put into this institution, into Mayo, and the results of his labor are something you can take pride in, and it is your legacy. I know you have a high standard, but that is your legacy. You will build on it, because he was so proud of you both. So everything he did was for you guys. Don't forget that for 1 second. I'm going to say one thing to Frank, and then I have a couple anecdotes, and we can start it off. Who's next after this, Jill? Okay. Frank, you came from humble beginnings. You achieved great things. You brought joy to those you met along the way. Your brilliance, your kindness, your humor touched us all. You had a better life, and we are all better for it. Rest in peace, Frank. I like that. Your memory will forever live on the hearts of those who were privileged to know you, and your contributions to medicine and humanity will live on in the lives of the people you touch for years to come. And that's all of us here, I think. So I have a couple anecdotes I'll start with. One of my favorites, many people know that the Bushes held a development fund party at Kennebunkport. And of course, they served lobster. And of course, with lobster, you have big tubes of butter, melted butter. Frank was sitting next to Barbara Bush. He spilled that butter on Mrs. Bush. She was known for her composure. Frank was aghast. She got up and changed, and the next year joked about Frank not sitting by her. But she showed great courage and brought Frank in, actually made a point of bringing him next to put things at ease. The other thing, and I asked Catherine this, if we all know Frank had hats, I said to Catherine, there must be 50 lost and founds around the world where Frank has hats sitting. 100. And Catherine and Deb and Sean said, oh, we already found like 18 to 20. You should have brought them. We could have all worn them. So anyway, I love the guy. I learned so much from him. I enjoyed him. I traveled the world around. Anis is from Saudi. We've spent some crazy times in the Middle East. A million stories there. But in the interest of time, let's open it up to other people.
I wanted to end with a question to you, Jill. I think Jill spent a lot of time at Costco buying mass quantities of eyeglass cleaners. Because both of us used to take Frank's and just clean them.
Eyeglass cleaner, yeah.
Cleaners,
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, the cleaners.
Yeah.
Oh, Mayo Optical gives it out free.
Good to know now. The mic is open if someone else wants to make remarks. I know one person that does.
Jill, you missed the Toro Pupu.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Scott, I guess that you might have known Frank more than I have. I've known him for 45 years. Okay, so I guess that, and actually we met at a meeting in Early, Virginia. It was in April of 1978, and I think that we just sat on the opposite sides of the table at lunch, and I was so impressed, and of course with his presentations and so on. That was the time of new science of protein motion in proteins, and he was doing that with his fluorescence big time. And that 2 years later, I invited him to a meeting in Croatia that I organized at that time when I was, and surprisingly he came. And that meeting left between him and me a secret that he really didn't keep. He essentially said that I'm the only person who got him drunk. Because there was like a gala dinner kind of that ended up in Raucous. So whether, I guess it was not for that he impressed others at that meeting. So he was 2 years later, he was at a meeting in the neighboring Slovenia, and where we met. And then we talked, and he said, okay, I have a position in my lab. Are you interested? So a year later, I was in Canada for a few months, and in winter of 72, 73, he said, okay, come to dinner and to the restaurant. It's that building where now they sell artificial limbs, Massey building. I think it was a restaurant down there. And I met his then new lovely girlfriend, Deb. You remember that night? Yeah, that was lovely. And it will be 6 weeks exactly from now, January 29, that it will be exactly 40 years that you and Frank came to Minneapolis airport with 2 cars to pick up my wife and 2 kids and everything else. So, and that really developed into friendship that I don't know whether it was more the friendship with the family, with the really seeing the exuberant joy of these two young people being born and participating in that. And Frank and I, in a way, although we don't look very similar, but there were very many similarities of the kind of mixed breeds coming from somewhere else and so on. So we talked to, he would share with me some of his thoughts about how the background affects life and how Jamaican perspective may be different than American perspective. And so these were very intimate conversations that, of course, have enriched me enormously. And Jamaica, yes, it was always in his heart. But also he spoke of his red-headed grandfather from parish Prendergast, and of all those things, of his mother who raised 5 kids on her own, and how his brother Keith was a highly regarded ENT surgeon in Canada, and all those things. So just to end without a structure of what I'm saying now, and I told Sean, for me and a few other people in this room, it's very difficult to find anyone else who has done for us, essentially to shape our entire lives. Without him, I certainly probably wouldn't be in the United States, certainly not at Mayo. So, Frank, I miss you as a friend first, and miss you as my mentor, and you keep living. Thank you.
Really quick anecdote. I was Frank's second employee. His first employee told me that his great desire was to get a job at IBM, and that if he ever did so, he would tell me, and then I could apply for the job. This is back in '79, and human resources was personnel back then, and things were handled very loosely. So Frank had the opportunity to simply say, "Yeah, I'll hire you." But he brought me into his office and said, "So what's your biochemistry background like?" I said, "Not good." Thinking, okay, this is the end of that. And he said, "Well, good, you can't bias the results." Frank was a wonderful friend and mentor, and he made my career at Mayo happen, and I'll owe him for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Well, I prepared something because Frank and I go back about 50 years. I met him through dear friends, the Krautkramers, who my friend Sue Kramer had met Frank because she was working at the Mayo Medical Library, and she brought him home, and he got to meet her folks, Ed and Pat, and her sisters, Laura and Carrie, who happened to be here. And since they didn't have a son, they adopted Frank into their family, and I met them through their daughter Sue. It was while I was in medical school, about 6 years later, that I really got to know the man who would become my Jamaican older brother. Frank knew that I was struggling financially as well as in my head, and he provided meals by taking me to restaurants that I could never have walked in, driving like a Jamaican taxi driver to some of them, and I'd be gasping. He lent me his car one summer when he was out doing research at Washington, and he offered a listening ear as well as words of support, which I certainly needed. For about 10 years, Frank and I lost touch, and then one day my husband and we had moved to Rochester from Minneapolis, and I saw Frank and Deb and Catherine at the Galleria Mall. Well, from that point on, our lives were entwined, and we'd celebrate New Year's together, and new babies, and graduations, birthdays, family members, and weddings. His intellect aside, Frank was just a really good man. He desperately loved his family, and perhaps too often in providing for them was on an airplane, flying from one board meeting to another. He was a skilled craftsman, so proud of the basement he had built in his Rochester's house. He was a master gardener, and Scott mentioned that, the place where he had such peace. He was a great storyteller, a cordon bleu type chef like Deb, and a rabid Trump despiser, and a man who never forgot that his roots were from being raised in Jamaica by a grandmother and aunt while his mother worked as a domestic in the U.S. to support the family. He knew only too well what the lack of money felt like. And in fact, my last conversation with him, about a week before he died, he said he hoped his family would always know that everything he did was done in order to provide for them and support them. Frank's intellect was a gift and a burden for him and the family. It must have been difficult for Deb, Catherine, and Sean to live in the same household with someone who always knew probably more about a subject than they could ever know. Someone whose thoughts and ideas did not allow sleep. Someone who could not tolerate fools, especially you know who. Trump. And someone whose ties to friendship were so deep that the family was perhaps all left to wonder, where is he and what now? Frank, I think he would want to be remembered mostly for being a good human being who loved his family deeply, whose friendships were treasured. Frank loved his jaunty hats, his cats, and science. And he lived to make this world a better place, and he did that. Thanks.
My name is Martin, and you can probably tell I'm Jamaican. I'm the beneficiary of Frank's kindness. I actually met Frank long before I knew him. We happened to share the same high school, and one of the things that was prevalent in my high school was a board which listed the names of people who did very well academically, and there was the name Franklyn Prendergast. And later on, I had a viva, and in walked this man, and he said, "My name is Franklyn Prendergast." And I said, "My God, I know your name. You went to Calabar, didn't you?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "What are you going to do after this?" And I said, "I'm not quite sure." He said, "Well, why don't you come up to Mayo and do a PhD?" I said, "Okay." Had to do the requisite entrance requirements, blah, blah, blah. And a few months later, there I was in Rochester, minus 10 degrees, and realizing that I had a cold gene because I didn't feel excessively cold. So it fitted quite well. So what I wanted to say is I deliberated quite a bit before thinking whether I should say something, but I thought I should, because Frank has been like a father to me. Frank and Debbie, I shared many, many happy memories at their house, eating, drinking. My thesis was actually written while they were on holidays in their house. Frank was one of the smartest men I've ever met. And now, having had experience meeting a few other people who are very accomplished, Nobel Prize winners, etc., Frank could hold his own with any of them. And I'm not saying this not because I'm Jamaican and he's Jamaican. He was a man of very great intellect. He was very kind and generous with his time and with his resources. And he was basically a decent human being. I think if one should say what his overriding qualities were, besides his genius, is that he was what we should all aspire to be as humans. He was kind, generous, attentive. He gave you his opinions freely. A minute with Frank would be enough to give you ideas for 6 months. I mean, that was his level. And you could converse with him on anything. You could talk about politics, although in very conservative Rochester, that was not always wise, but you could talk politics, you could talk about science, you could talk about religion. He was adept at many things. And I think all of us here can say that we met someone who was truly great. And Sean and Catherine, who was my little friend and plaything when we were small, I want you to always remember that you should be proud of your dad. Your dad would not want you to think that his achievements are something that you have to emulate. Be the best that you can be, and that's all that he would want, right? You don't have to compete with him. They'll always be greater and better than ourselves. So just be the best that you can be, and know that your dad was one of the best men that ever lived. Thank you.
Very quick. I'm Steve Reed from Seattle. Many of you have talked about the impact of Frank on individual lives. I will say that I started a nonprofit institute 25 years in Seattle. Frank was our chairman. We were trying to do things that nobody else was interested in doing. Here I had a famous person from Mayo to support us. We got Gates money, etc. We made the first vaccines against leishmaniasis, which is a parasitic disease. Tuberculosis and leprosy all went through clinical trials. Without Frank and people like him, this would have been impossible. So he made an impact on millions of lives.
Most of you don't know me. I'm Phil Lau from Purdue University. 28 years as I count back. Frank actually introduced me to medicine and inspired or encouraged me to try to apply some of our chemical tools to human diseases. And it was actually due to him that I entered into this area. And I don't want to applaud Frank's tremendous intelligence, which I totally concur with, or his leadership capabilities, but what really impressed me about Frank was his interest in the unimportant people and his motivations for doing. He had tremendous energy. He was able to go constantly and continually engage all the different people around him and push them on and help them in their various endeavors. But what was most interesting to me was the fact that he would call me frequently, or I would call him. He actually served on the board of 3 of my companies and helped me develop others. But in the course of our conversations, he would always ask how my family was doing. And occasionally I would share with him, well, my daughter Tara's been running a lot and her knees are giving out on her and she's really distressed about this. He would then call her up on the phone and start to talk and inquire about her problems and actually go out of his way to arrange for her to see an expert at Mayo Clinic. Or in my wife's case, she had bronchiectasis, and he went and personally met with the chief lung doctor or pulmonologist at National Jewish Hospital in Denver and assured that she would get in to see him right away. My son had some other issues, and what was amazing is over the course of these conversations, they would develop a friendship, and my children now looked on Frank as their godfather, and they continued for years afterwards, and even till his recent death, to enjoy each other's company in conversation. Or my son Stuart had business frequently in Denver, and so they would go out to eat. And they are unimportant people compared to all of the other, Barbara Bushes and presidents of the United States, or chairman of the board of Mayo. And I know that Frank was on the board of directors at Eli Lilly for 25 years. But Frank took a really deep and sincere interest in their well-being and wouldn't let it go until their problems were solved. I love that man. I mean, I think he is just the epitome of a scholar and a gentleman. I have interacted with many famous scientists in my career, but I've never seen anyone that cared about people as much as Frank. And the combination of those two qualities is a remarkable and a very unique attribute of Frank. And I can tell you that at least in my family circles, he's left a footprint on this planet that won't be removed. So I'm grateful to Frank, and I think he was a great man.
Good evening. I'll just try to be brief. I'm honored to be here today to commemorate the legacy and celebrate the life of Dr. Frank Prendergast. My name is Rashid Bashir. I'm at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm the Dean of the Granger College of Engineering. And I had the pleasure of actually meeting Frank about 18 years ago or so or more when I was at Purdue. And actually that was thanks to a friend, George Westmansis, who's here. George and I have known each other for a long time, and I was at Purdue. And he introduced me to Frank, and Frank was just immediately so interested and excited about nanotechnology, which is what I did. And as I think many of you have heard already, he seemed to know about every topic more than I thought he knew. So that was just always consistent across many topics. But anyway, we ended up putting a big proposal together with Purdue and Mayo. It was not funded, but what came out of that was lots of other R01s and just a great friendship and relationship. I then moved to Illinois, and actually Frank kept in touch, and he also knew a bunch of other people at the University of Illinois. And again, with George and many others here, actually, and the leadership at that time, that ended up really forming the Mayo-Illinois Alliance, which now exists. And again, many, many people participated in that, but it was really Frank at the time with the director of the Cancer Center, and then moving to the director of the Center for Individualized Medicine, who really helped make that happen. So I think lots of great things happened out of that, and it was great impact. Frank was also actually on our College of Engineering advisory board for many years. Prior to me as the dean, he was advising, and then since I became the dean, he was also on the board. Of course, for the last few years, he was not active, but he always kept in touch, and I didn't talk to him as much as I wished I had, but certainly the last few years were certainly very tough in terms of keeping up. He was also very, very instrumental in us starting a new College of Medicine, which was the first engineering-based College of Medicine. So I remember I actually was the one that called him. We were trying to get leaders from across the country to give sort of their advice or support as we were putting the proposal to our board of trustees. And Frank was just so excited about this is a great idea, and yeah, how can I help? So he was really, really very instrumental and gave us a lot of support and advice through that formation of the new College of Medicine. And again, as mentioned, I mean, he was just such a gentleman scholar, just a perfect example of a gentleman scholar, always, I think, imbuing our interactions with deep thinking, the desire to just make a profound impact on the world, and again, always striving for quality and excellence. And I will miss him also personally and professionally, and again, on behalf of the entire UIUC community. Our chancellor couldn't be here today, but he has met him too, and I told him I was coming, so he passed his condolences to the family. And again, from all of us, our condolences to the family and friends, and pray that his soul rests in peace. Thank you.
Hi, my name is George. Actually, I talked to Frank 2 days before he passed. And I'm going to change the mood here because he was mad. And he told me, George, stop being a freaking coward. Unquote freaking. And what did he mean by that, really? So I've been thinking about that for since then. And the first thing I realized is that, so Frank was a man of principles. He really loved being at Mayo because Mayo is all about principles. The patient comes first. It's not about you, about, yourself. It's about the patient. And he always was saying that to me. I want to see myself in the mirror every day and feel that I'm doing the right thing. And no matter what the politics were, and there were a lot of politics, Frank was always trying to do what Mayo wanted him to do, which is the right thing. One of the things he wanted us to do is develop a community of scientists. Instead of working for ourselves, work together and not be about yourself, but about everybody else. I think the second thing that that meant is that I think we're losing what we were. I'm talking mostly to my Mayo colleagues here. I think Frank, in the end, he was afraid that Mayo is not what it used to be. And through his message, he was telling me that I got to do something about it, that I cannot be a coward, that I have to speak up and say what he always did, fight for the patient and not for the money and everything else. So I wanted to just share that with you, that part of his last words to us is not to be cowards.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Monique Ford, married named Freund. I am a proud alumnus of Frank's University. As you can hear, I'm also from Jamaica. And there's nothing that I can say that can encapsulate his character. Eloquence would fail me. And as you all know, he had the gift of speech. He filled a room, but as has been shared by others, when you were in his presence, you felt like you were the most important thing that there was. I am, as many of you are, a part of a legacy that Frank started, and I am grateful. In the mid-1990s, like Martin, I had a viva. For those of you who are in the American system, the viva is, in the British system, what you have to do to defend a degree. You don't just get an honor or a distinction, you have to defend it so you can get the grade, but you have to do an oral defense. So in the 90s, I came into my biochemistry viva, and I met a man by the name of Dr. White Owen. He was in the plumber research, the hematology research lab. Before I could sit down, he said to me, how would you create an experiment to calculate the surface tension of something like a bubble on or something? And I was just, and I guess I answered. The short of the story is I won a scholarship. I did not know where Minnesota was. People teased me that I was going to somewhere related to mayonnaise. We looked on a map. What I learned was that this scholarship, I believe, was founded by Frank. I came in the 90s from Kingston, Jamaica to Rochester, Minnesota. And on a program that Frank started, and my program was called the Special Student Program. I can't find my badge, but my badge literally, you remember those old black badges with the engravement? It said Special Student. I'm so glad it's not now. Excuse me. But what I wanted to say, while I tried to turn my phone off, I apologize, is that I came to grow and know Frank, not just as a mentor, not in his academic sense, but for the person that he was. He was like a father figure to me. I would be able to either track him down through Jill, or around this time of the year, Jill would track me down for him to call me. And over the years, we did lose touch with him. But I want to say that there are several of us here in the Mayo community from Jamaica, from Barbados, from other parts of the Caribbean that are recipients of his legacy. And I want to thank his family for allowing us to come into your home. I remember I could see the admiration you had as children. I don't even know if you remember me, but being in your home, I could see a respect that you had as children for your father, even though you didn't say anything, but I could see the presence that he had. Deb, I want to thank you for the times in your kitchen, the meals that you shared. And I also want to quickly read a message from my parents who are in Jamaica and trying to watch at this moment. We are indeed sad to learn of Frank's passing. We will surely miss him,
and seeing him on our annual visit. We would visit with him. My wife, my mother, would cook his favorite rice and peas and ackee and saltfish for him. We also took him juicy beef patties, which were his favorites. We will miss his intellectual conversations. He was so articulate in his expression. It was a privilege to interact with him. May his soul rest in peace. On behalf of the people of Jamaica, the alumni of the University of the West Indies, the University Hospital of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica, and for all the lives that Frank has touched, may he rest in peace.
I think, just on behalf of the family, again, this has been a phenomenal turnout. Frank would have loved it and also wondered why. But thank you on behalf of the family.